My name is Laurie Faure. I've been a teacher now for 14 years. Currently, I'm teaching STEM grades K to 5. This is my third year doing that. Prior to that, I was a second and third grade teacher for a number of years, and then did a number of other things before that. But always have been interested in art, always have been interested in how art reaches us emotionally and speaks to us. And so I had an opportunity a number of years ago to participate in something called slow art, which I'll talk to you more about. And that's when after that participation, kind of came up with this idea of slow art with kids and tried it with my students. If you want to get this slide deck, you can just email me. And at the end, I have the email there too. So if you don't want to take notes, I mean, if you're any pictures, that's fine, because you can get all of this later. Okay, so today, these are the things we hope to accomplish: to give you an understanding about what slow art with kids is all about, get a little experience with slow art, have a connection with social emotional learning and slow art, and I'll make that connection as we sort of define slow art and then move on. Discover some ways to help students not only with slow art, but also having a more reflective life, and hopefully challenge yourself and have some fun. So the slow movement, this is just a little history on that. It began in 1986 in Rome when McDonald's wanted to put in a restaurant on the Spanish Steps. So people in Rome or in Italy are very passionate about their meals. They did not want this restaurant to be built there, so the story goes that they marched down with their bowls of pasta saying, "We don't want fast food, we want slow food." And that slow food movement started with that. There's a sort of sad epilogue that I just found out recently, that they actually didn't keep McDonald's from eventually coming into Rome and to the Spanish Steps, and in fact a lot of other places there too. But even today, when they try and put in those restaurants, they put up a lot of restrictions. They try and keep them away from certain monuments, away from certain districts, but they're still there. What it did spawn, though, was a slow food movement, which is a good thing, and that continues today. The slow food movement then was the impetus for a lot of other slow movements in other arenas. And in 2009, there was the first Slow Art Day, and that took place throughout the United States, Canada, and in Europe in 16 museums and other galleries. From that, 10 years later now, we have an international event every year, the Slow Art Day at museums, and you can mark your calendar now, because April 4th, 2020 is when the Slow Art Day will be at the Honolulu Museum of Art. So, slow art, what is it exactly? I had no idea. I read that there was this event, Slow Art Day at the museum, and I thought, well, okay, I'll go and try that out. And what you do is you go there, the museum has selected 5 works of art. You get a map, you get a stool, doesn't matter what order you view these works of art in. You sit yourself down in front of one for 10 minutes, silently just watching this work of art, just looking at it. Then you move on 10 minutes later, and so you see these 5 works of art in about an hour, and then after that, all the participants meet. In this case, it was at the museum. You meet and you discuss what you saw, piece by piece. And it's very loosely organized. You talk about, what you felt, what the artwork meant to you, questions that you might have had, what you liked, what you didn't like, just how it resonated with you. And it was really interesting because, of course, everybody sees things differently. And when you hear these comments, well, I never would have thought of it that way. I never approached it that way. I never felt that way about it. Then there's a facilitator that will add more information afterwards, tell you a little bit about the artist or the time period that it was created, give you a little bit more information, and of course that adds just another lens to the experience. And that was it. And I thought, well, I really enjoyed it. It was, I hadn't looked at art that way before. So I left, and that was that. And I started thinking more about it and thought, I think I'd like to try this with my students. I'm not sure how it would work. At the time I was teaching 2nd and 3rd grade with Chris at the lab school, and so I thought we'd give it a go. And I had then read this quote. This is by Henry David Thoreau. It's not what you look at that matters, it's what you see. And I started thinking more about that and thought, yeah, that's really true. We look at a lot of things, but we look at them so quickly and in passing. Even people, do we really, it takes a while to really see something carefully, to see it repeatedly, to really internalize it and understand what you're seeing. And so this kind of made me think, yeah, I'm going to give slow art a try with the kids. I then was reflecting back on my experience, and I'll tell you, the first time I did it though, I got my stool and I sat down, and I even sat down in front of a work by Van Gogh. I thought I won't get too abstract at first. I'll do something that I think, you know, I'll relate to that. And I sat down and thought, oh, 10 minutes. And then I thought, no, I'm not sitting in the right spot. I better move over here, you know, and I'm getting and I just couldn't stop fidgeting. And finally, I settled in and said, okay, this is it. And then, so it took me a while to get into that first experience. Each subsequent piece I viewed, it was better. But I was thinking of that and thought, well, I know, we all know, we've had those kids that 10 minutes is not going to happen at all. But you don't start with 10 minutes with kids. You start with a few minutes and you build up their stamina for it. But I thought, well, maybe there's some things that we can do even prior to that to just kind of see if this experience will go a little bit more smoothly. So what I've done is created these practices for slowing down and being slow. Now these don't have to precede slow art, I did, but these are things that I've used since then in between transitions, just when you need sort of a brain break during the day, and I'll explain what they are. And we can even try them. So mindful bodies, when they're sitting in front of this work of art, the idea is that they sit still and they sit comfortably. They're not getting up and moving around like I was at first. You should just be able to sit and look at the art and focus on that. So in order to do that, and when I've done it with kids, we've sat on the floor or sitting in a chair. But if you want, I don't know if these chairs are conducive to it, but a mindful body would look something like this. This is what I would say to the kids. Okay, put your feet on the floor, just at a comfortable distance apart. You want to have your knees at a 90-degree angle. And this is a good check to see if the chairs are the appropriate size for your students, because if their feet are dangling, then you know the chairs are too big. And if their knees are up past 90 degrees, you know that they're too big for that chair. And you may not have a choice with the chairs, but that's kind of gives you an idea. So it's 90 degrees. You're sitting up, your spine, you can have them feel their backbones. Your spine should be nice and straight, one vertebrae stacked on top of the other. Relax your shoulders. Your hands are just comfortably on your knees. Your chin parallel to the floor, and almost as if there's a string just sort of extending up. And if you're sitting like that and everything is lined up, you should be able to sit like that for quite a while. And it takes practice, and that's why it is a practice, but the kids are able to do it. And we just start slowly and then move on from there. Sometimes we're in that position and I'll say, okay, looks like we need to take a break. Let's get out our breathing ball. And what that looks like is you hold your hands like this. We can do it. Put our fingertips together and bring them together like this. When you inhale and exhale. So you're just inhaling and exhaling, inflating and deflating the breathing ball. And then with the kindergartners, we'd put it in our pocket, but sometimes they take it back out. So that's another opportunity for them just to practice slowing down, being still, listening to what's going on, being in the present moment, because we're always telling them, pay attention, focus. What does that really mean? It means right now. It means be here with yourself right now. But they don't understand that. So this gives them some opportunities to sort of feel it. Now, Shinrin-yoku, I did not know about this until more recently, but now I've been reading about it a little bit here and there. It's a Japanese practice, and it's therapeutic, and it really is just forest bathing is the translation, or going around and taking the atmosphere in of a forest. What it basically is that we all need a connection to nature. And sometimes we don't have that connection near enough. We live in a city, there might be a park, but the Shinrin-yoku takes you out in nature in a way that's prescribed and gives you certain things to look at, certain experiences, certain activities that get you connected to nature. And again, it's slowing down. I saw recently they're going to have one at the Foster Botanical Garden, and they're also at Lion Arboretum every so often. So if you check online, you can find those dates. I haven't done either one of those, but it's available. And then the silent walk. We love the silent walk at school. The silent walk is just what it says it is. It's a silent walk. And in the silent walk, during that time, they will listen to their own internal voice and they will be silent the entire time. I tell them that, and you look pointedly at those certain students that need that reinforcing, and you will be silent the entire time. That's another one that takes practice. I'm going to read the next slide because this is actually what I say to the students. We're going on a silent walk. This is a sensory experience. You will not speak. You may listen, look, and smell, but we will not touch or taste anything during this silent walk. We will discuss why we're doing this after you've had the experience. During this walk, I will be the leader. You will walk silently, safely, and stay together as you follow my lead. You're not to speak or gesture in any way. You're having your own private experience and will respect the need of others to have their own private experience, uninterrupted by your actions. Again, looking at those certain students. When we are back in the classroom, you will continue to be silent as you return to your seat and write silently about your experience in your reflections journal. I've also done this too, where they write in their journal, or we don't have to. We can come back and we can have more of a slow art experience where we just have a discussion of what we noticed, how we felt, that sort of thing. Sometime when I first started doing this, I would write some journal prompts on the board just so that they would come back and have a few things that they would be able to recall and focus on in their writing. But it depends on the age of the students and your students. So that is the silent walk. It's fun to do. You can do it, if it's a rainy day, you can actually do it in your classroom. But we do it, you can go around the building, you can go as far as you like for as long as you like. We started with maybe 5 minutes and came back. A few days later, we tried it again. In no time, we were up to walking for about 20 minutes and then writing, and they didn't want to stop writing afterwards. And it was a class that was, mixed range, and we didn't spend a lot of time writing any more than anybody else would, but they didn't want to stop. And the experiences that we had when talking about it too was interesting. And even those students that had a difficult time being quiet, sometimes they were the ones that they became the leader with you, but they actually all were able to do it and respect each other's experience as well. So that was the silent walk. Now, doing those things helps, I found, when the kids then are going to do slow art with kids, having to sit and having to be still for the amount of time that they are looking at the artwork. So those are some things you might try before a slow art experience. Excuse me. At the end of the slow art experience, you come together and you start discussing the artwork that you looked at. If you do it at school, let's say, you can have the actual work of art in front of you. At the museum, we all convened in one place and they had prints of what we had seen. So either way works, but it's just a way to recall what you had just looked at. So for the students that I had discussing art, they loved to discuss art and they loved to point out things that they saw, but it was always, well, that thing over there, and I was like, no, we need to have a vocabulary that helps us understand what you want us to see a little bit better. So we started very simply with just the top, the bottom, left, right, center, middle, foreground, middle, background. And I've made those signs sometimes where if you have a poster, if you have some art at school, you can even just post those up in the location so that the kids can refer back to that when they're talking. Or if it's just up, it's kind of that subliminal they quickly learn. Then for elements and principles of art, what I found is that during our discussions, and these are our elements of art, during the discussions, sometimes kids would have their location and they'd say, on the left-hand side, near the edge, in the foreground, there's a door, and it really looks bumpy, like you could touch it. And I'd say, oh, you're right, let me see, yes, okay, I've located it. And they would say, yeah, I said, bumpy, can you describe that? Well, like if you could feel it, like it looks like you could feel it. And I would say, well, it does, doesn't it? You're right. In art, there's a term for that, it's called texture. And so now they've got an art term that they can add to that list that we built, and it's in an authentic way, and you can then, they start using that. So you can build that art vocabulary with the elements or principles of design very easily when you're having these discussions. Also on the silent walk, if we didn't write in our journal, if we were having a discussion about the experience, those same terms can come into play during that time as well. So they're seeing lines in nature, there's no straight lines in nature, they're describing the shape of something, all of those things, the texture of things. Even if we're not touching something, they can describe what the texture looked like. So that you can bring those standards in both during the silent walk as well as the slow art with kids. So standards. Most of us, if we're in public education or private education, we're standards based, and so slow art with kids supports the standards. There's national core standards, those are voluntary, and there's about 30 states that have adopted those standards. There's another 10 plus states that are revising their current standards. Hawaii is one of those, to sort of mirror the core art standards. We still use the Hiccups visual art standards, and what they say are that we are to understand how the visual arts communicate a variety of ideas, feelings, and experiences. In the core art, it has to do with responding and connecting. And those are the parts of our standards that connect to social emotional learning. So when you're looking at art and you want to, if you're teaching art or not, if you're having a slow art experience with the kids, there's still that social emotional connection that is supported by the standards. And for some schools, that's very important. So our slow art practice. The first time I practiced it with kids, we actually started with some of these small images. I had visions of not being in this auditorium type room. I thought, oh, we'll be around small tables and we can do this. But anyway, so I had multiple copies of these. I think these at some point, I 4 years ago, went to a DOE school and so unearthed these things. So I'm not sure how old they are or where they came from. But anyway, they're multiple copies of some prints. And what I've used these for is I've handed them out to the kids so we could practice slow art just on our own as a class, but they could each practice themselves. And then we could have that group discussion. So if you're able to get multiple copies, it's one way to sort of, again, prepare for the experience where you're looking at larger works of art. I thought we could try it. I don't know if it's going to work with the lights, but this is what it might be like in a museum. You would be sitting in front of a work of art at a position where you'd like to be, and you would just look at it. You could get up, of course, if you wanted to read information about it. There's no restrictions. No one's watching you do this. The patrons are going through the gallery, so you kind of have, that's why it's good if you can just really spend that 10 minutes focusing in. And so, since we have some time, want to try? We'll try. Okay, so get in your comfortable position where you think you might be able to sit. We won't spend 10 minutes. We'll spend maybe, I also tell the kids to not worry about the time, that I'll let them know when it's time to move to the next one, because otherwise they're, is it time yet? So we'll just do this for maybe 3 minutes, just to give you a sense of what it's like to just sort of sit and look. Well, I don't really think it's been 3 minutes, but we can stop if you like. I hope you just get a sense of what the idea is, that you sit long enough so that you start to just put other things aside and connect with that painting. And what would happen next is we would then talk about it. So we can, if there's anyone that would like to make an observation, a comment, how it made you feel, what you wondered about, what you noticed. Would you want it in your living room? Yeah, because he's really gazing out there in a different view than the woman holding the child. Yeah.
Well, when I first saw it, I thought they were all just kind of waiting that Dad was supposed to come home. But then the more I looked at it, yeah, she looks like she's got them all dressed up, ready to go, hoping he'll come, but like maybe they've done this before and Dad hasn't shown up. And so she's like back there thinking, well, I hope he's coming, and the boys, he looks also like he's not quite sure, but they're hoping.
Yeah.
Hoping that today's the day.
Great. You read a lot into that.
Well, and it made me feel sad.
Yeah, there's sort of a melancholy quality to it. Yeah. Did you have a comment too?
I was kind of shocked how when I first looked at it, I thought she was the mom. And it took my eyes quite a while to realize, like, oh, okay, that's a young girl. And they're waiting for their dad probably. I was thinking the same thing as a sailor or something. And then I was kind of shocked how long it took me to recognize that other boat over there.
Oh.
Like, oh, there's another boat over there. That's a boat. And I thought, wow, it really is, to really look at it, you do get that feel, you start to get appreciation for the details too, and the shadows.
Mm-hmm.
Just the amazing piece of art that it is with all those, highlights on their face.
Exactly. And an appreciation. I mean, we're so quick and we take our pictures that, somebody spent a lot of time, doing that, connecting to that, putting their emotions and feelings into it as well. Yes?
I created a story in my mind, and I was thinking about the time of day because of the shadows. And I thought that the boy was dreaming. Yes, I thought they were also waiting for the father, but I thought the boy he's dreaming of wanting to be like his father.
Mm-hmm.
And his looking out is a hopeful looking out, whereas the girl, I think it's a big sister, and I think she's just kind of thinking of all the chores that she has to do and all the work that she has to do. And it's kind of like there's this heaviness on her. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's so beautiful.
Yeah, she does. She has a very pensive look on her face. Mm-hmm.
I feel like the dad just left. Maybe you go fishing or something, and the boy he wants to go. He wants to be like Dad. And I thought it was the mom, so I just got this sense like, oh, my husband's left, and now I've got the kids, and will he come back? So, a little bit different.
It's true.
I was thinking of ways of using the vocabulary, so I was thinking that I really noticed a lot of texture in even though it's on a slide. And also the use of the foreground and the background, like the foreground is kind of like, seems to me like not the emphasis, but it's the most clear. But then the background is the most important in our imagination because we're wondering what's out there, but it's the most unclear part of the painting.
True. It's that, yeah, the unknown of what's out there. Right. Well, those were, and for me, I've not seen it this large before, so that was a different experience, and all of your comments have played into my own personal experience looking at that. And I think we can see how our social emotional selves are tied into things like this, especially when we take a little bit of time to look. Even if we've never personally had an experience like this, you get the sense of, we've all waited for somebody or been disappointed when somebody's leaving. It doesn't look like that excited, oh, they're coming back, I can't wait type of feeling. It's more there's this undercurrent of sadness and sort of tension. So if this were in your classroom now or in a museum, then what would happen would you know a little bit more about the artist, who is Winslow Homer, and it is called Dad's Coming. And the context of this is, I guess he was in Gloucester, and at that time, prior to this, there had been a fishing accident where a number of men lost their lives. I don't know but that influenced when he painted this, that was an influence on it. But you can see that knowing that and knowing the context just gives you another layer, something else to talk about. A picture like that might be good for students here because a lot of people fish, or you could even, when you go to the museum, sometimes, different museums, they will have kids look at works of art, and they'll give them some prompts, like, okay, let's all make observations first. So we're going to look and we're going to observe what we see, and we're going to describe it. And then they'll say things like, well, I see a boat and the sky is blue, and there's 3 people in the picture, and that sort of thing, just description. Then you are to make some observations about it, adding to the description. Well, they look like they're waiting, or they look sad, or the sky looks like it's about to rain. And then you're interpreting what you see is the next step, and then you finally express yourself on how you connect to it or don't. So there's that way of looking. That way of looking is great too. To me, it doesn't, it's structured. When you do slow art and you just look for 10 minutes, you have a chance to listen to your own thoughts, and they might come from a lot of different directions. You may focus on, there may be something that's so compelling that you can't not look at it first and connect to it in some way. Or there might be something else that takes a while to reveal itself. So for my students, we chose to have that more open-ended experience, but you can do it another way also. There's no, like, the nice thing about it is there's no right or wrong way. So here's how we can connect it a little more to social emotional learning. So if a picture's worth 1,000 words, then art, slow art with kids, can be worth 1,000 emotions. And it's something that's easy for them to talk about when they're talking about how they feel about something. It generates good conversation. It generates good connectedness in your classroom, because generally they can all relate to, more or less, to some of the other experiences that the kids have had. So the Collaborative for Academic, Social, and Emotional Learning, CASEL, does a lot of research on SEL, and these are their competencies that they've come up with for social emotional learning, whether you're looking for a program or whether you're teaching it yourself. These are things that you want to include, and that would be the self-awareness, self-management, responsible decision-making, having relationship skills, and just being socially aware. So considering those, and when you look at art and the thinking about your own thinking, I thought all of those are part of it. When you're looking at that work of art, your self-awareness comes into play. Well, especially for me, it was like, where do I sit? What do I do? But you are initially self-aware of your body and your position. Then you start becoming aware of how you relate to that work of art. Maybe you put yourself into it. Maybe you imagine that, what if I was that little boy? What would that feel like? Maybe you've had to wait for someone. In those situations, you might want to think about the management, your decision making. What do I do? Do I sit there quietly? Do I need to get up? All of these things, and mostly that painting, I think would support relationship skills and just social awareness. So a painting, a work of art doesn't cover all, but I think that's, if you use several different ones, and it doesn't have to be paintings. When we did the slow art at the museum, they also selected a couple sculptures. And it wasn't always, and they were things sometimes that were very abstract. There were collage, so it gave us a variety. Some things you really connected to, others I had a hard time with, but it was interesting to hear what other people had to say about it. And then it was more interesting to find out what the artist had to say also about that, where they were coming from. So that's a bit the intersection of those two, social emotional learning and slow art with kids. So as we even just now talked about, art always elicits emotions, usually strong emotions. I think some of the studies started out with that, and still people go through museums, they get museum fatigue, they feel compelled to see everything, so they just sort of blast past things really quickly. And they say anywhere from 17 seconds to 27 seconds is about the average that people spend on looking at a work of art, which is very brief. But they also decided too, in some of these studies, that maybe people come back. You might go through and just sort of find ones that you're instantly drawn to and come back. And so it's that repeated exposure. So maybe repeated exposure over time, or a big chunk of exposure at one time, can have a similar effect. It does speak to your emotions. The color impacts you. When I did the slow art one time at the museum, there's this large sculpture, but it's on the wall. It's very three-dimensional, and it's very shades of dark brown and black. And to me, I can't identify it. There's something in the middle that looks like a mouth with teeth. And I just look at that, and it just feels like an angry, aggressive sort of work of art. I don't know what it is. And so I was sitting there looking at it, thinking, no, I don't want this in my living room. Is my 10 minutes up? I kind of wanted to leave. Maybe I'd like it better if it was all in pink, but I was just having a hard time with it. But later, when we talked about it, other people had completely different experiences. And so now when I see that, it's still in the museum. When I see it, I have a different experience. I look at it, I still don't want it in my living room necessarily, even in pink, but it speaks to me differently. So that exchange and that social connection that other people made with it, I can kind of understand better. And then art does trigger memories, like the piece we just looked at, waiting for somebody. If you're a little kid, my dad wasn't a fisherman, but when he'd come home at night after work, you always knew it was about time for him to come home. It was exciting. And then the metacognition is our giving ourselves time to think about thinking. I don't think we do that a lot with children. It's hard for them to understand a lot of that, but they can get to it through something like slow art, because they do have an internal dialogue. And if you start during your discussion saying, well, what made you think of that? Or why are you asking that? Or what? Then they say, oh, I was thinking of this. Did you hear it? Yeah, I was kind of having a conversation with myself. So that you can use that, leverage that when they're doing, say, math. Well, do you have a conversation with yourself during your math problems? First I do this, next I do that, then I check this, finally I do that. Or with close reading, you can do that, allow them to have the opportunity and give them the skills to develop that sort of voice inside their head that guides them, and hopefully guides them in social emotional situations too. I'm feeling really angry. Well, what can I do? What are those tools I can use? I'm not going to solve a problem if I'm angry. Can I use my breathing ball? Can I just go for a walk? Do I need to get in touch with nature? Can I talk to somebody about it? So those are thoughts that they can keep in their head, think in their head, so that they don't immediately take action in those social situations which require some patience or some courage or just some empathy, all of those things. Just more on the social emotional part of it. Those competencies I mentioned, the ability to self-reflect. It's sometimes fun to have the kids do slow art, take a work of art that you might have. I'll talk later about how you can get this artwork, where you could go or what you can do, but then later revisit it. Maybe the beginning of the year, maybe mid-year, at the end of the year, but as they grow, they're going to have a different relationship with that work of art too. Of course, they've heard the discussion and that plays into it, but it's interesting to just do it again and see what how they feel about it, that self-reflection. And it helps them identify their emotions. When they look at those works of art, they might say, yeah, I feel uncomfortable. And then they could examine, well, what is it that makes you feel uncomfortable about that? Well, I don't really understand it. Maybe that's where their hesitation comes in. And you can say, well, talk about other times in their lives when they felt uncomfortable. Is it because you're concerned about something, you don't know what's going to happen next, that anticipation of something that makes you feel uneasy? And so it's a good springboard to have those discussions. Sometimes it's easier to talk about an emotion you have based on something that's not part of you, like a painting, and you can say, well, they look like they're feeling this way, and maybe that's how you've had that experience too, but you're talking about it through a third person. Some questions that you can bring to the discussion, and of course those are just some, you come up with your own, but what did it reveal to you about yourself? Maybe you find that you're always drawn to nature pictures. And then you could think about, well, why is that? Is it because I don't live in an environment where there's a lot of nature, or I've always lived around nature? How does it inform your social and emotional self with respect to others? Do you have that when you see a situation where people look like they're having a a good time? Does it remind you of having a good time? Or does it make you feel maybe sad because you don't often get together with family and have those experiences? So it's an opportunity again for self-reflection. And then to think about just the fact that you sat still for 10 minutes. And are there other times in your life that you might practice that? Maybe having a meal. What about just eating slowly and setting a timer and saying, I'm not going to eat in the car, I'm going to sit down and I'm going to spend 15 minutes with this, whatever it might be. And just what is that experience like? What other places in life can we slow down? Can we slow down when we say hello? Can we take the time to just, instead of passing so quickly, spend a minute with the kids? The practicals. So when I first did this, when I was at lab school, there's a lot of art around campus, and there's a lot of sculptures. You're on the university campus, so you have access to those things fairly easily. I went to a DOE school, and I was fortunate that the principal was really into art, so again, we had a lot of works of art that I could just take into the classroom, or we could go and visit and just sit in front of. The museums, though, the Honolulu Museum of Art and a lot of other museums have lending libraries. At the Linnacona Art School down in the basement, they've got wonderful things. I mean, they're artifacts. They have more artifacts and sculptural pieces, three-dimensional pieces, than they do paintings, but they do have a lot. And as a teacher, you can borrow them, and they're very helpful. They have a lot if you want to do themes, because slow art can be just random works of art that you've selected. It could be works of art that are based around a theme. It can also, you can flip it around and you can have a social emotional learning experience and then have the kids select the works of art that reflect those emotions. So it can work both ways. You can take your kids to the museums. The museums are really helpful because, again, if you say, I did it when the Hokulea was going around the world. And so I said, I'd like to look at works of art that are related, but not all. I didn't want to just look at works of art that were obviously they could identify with the Hokulea, but others. And so they suggested several, and it was really good. Then there's also, like I said, sometimes schools will have artwork displayed that you could borrow. You also might have parents that are artists that might let you borrow some of their artwork, or you might have your own. And then the community. There's a lot of places that display art, and there might be artists that are willing to have you borrow their art as well. So it doesn't have to be it doesn't have to be at your school. It can be other places. And speaking of other places, yeah. Oh, okay. I'm going to back up one. I think my slide that I wanted to say something about is coming up, so I'll wait. And if not, then I'll say it. So these are where you can get the artwork to do it yourself. I always like to think of, too, are there ways to do things that teach children, that help them become curious when you're not there? So setting up a display, sort of that self-directed art. And so slow art with kids can be self-directed, too. This is one suggestion. So if you take a work of art and you find a place like the hallway, the library, something that's where the cafeteria, someplace where everybody seems to go, pass by, and you can post it there. You can put some butcher block along the wall, have a table with some Post-it notes or just some pens, maybe some chairs, and invite the students. If they've had their own slow art with kids experience first, then they know what to do. It takes a little bit more explaining, some people, if they've never had the experience. But they can do it on their own, and they can then write their comments directly on the butcher paper or on the Post-it notes, and then others will read those comments, and it's sort of like having a discussion when you're not there facilitating the discussion. You can also do it where you could put a few prompts on the butcher paper too to help direct the discussion, and their comments can follow that. So it's just an idea to let the kids further their experience when you're not in class. There, that's the slide. Even more ideas. If you're an art teacher or you have a lot of student artwork in your classroom and you have a safe classroom, where the kids feel safe showing and commenting on their work, you could display students' work. You could use student work for slow art. You could also, another form of slow art is creating art slowly. That's sort of like that slow movement, slow eating, slow whatever. So you can actually just, with deliberation, have them do artwork slowly. It gives them that time again to think about their thinking. What are they doing? Or, you know, is it just, I don't want to say mindless because something's happening in there, but sometimes we rush through things very quickly. But to really think that, what am I doing? Why am I putting this here? What are my feelings at that moment? What am I trying to convey? Who am I doing the artwork for? Is it for me? Am I feeling a certain emotion and this is a good way for me to share it or to get it out? Or am I doing this because I've had this experience and it was so powerful or so beautiful or so emotional that I want to share it for others because maybe they can connect too. So if you're slowing down when you do your work of art, then I think you have more time to think about those things. We're lucky in Kaka'ako, every year for a number of years now, those big murals that they paint, powwow, those are great for slow art. We took the kids there and you have some different things to consider. It's outside, there's traffic, there's things happening, so there's a few different distractors that might take place, but the art's so huge and it's very compelling for kids that it worked well. I did it with 5th graders, and then we went over to the park and sat and talked about it. But the murals it's a great field trip, and of course that's one that just then, if you're an art teacher, just the idea of how do you construct that? How do you make something larger than life? You know, just the physical of it, up, down, how do you get the perspective? Are you doing different things? And then, as I mentioned before, it doesn't have to start with the art. It can start with the social emotional. You might be focusing on certain strategies that you want kids to develop with empathy. And so if you have the opportunity, you probably may not have endless supplies of artwork, but you could certainly either get online or maybe you have art books and the kids could go through and select those works of art that they felt displayed an empathetic situation, and then have them talk about it and have them share their ideas and then share, you know, have they had that experience too? Oh, just the future. I didn't know how it would feel to look at the coming home, or Dad's Coming, by Homer in such a large format and so flat. When you're in a museum, if you're looking at a painting, for me, there's something about the fact that I'm sitting in front of this Van Gogh. He sat in front of it, and he had his paintbrush in his hand, and he put that brush and the paint onto that canvas, and now, you know, years and years, hundreds of years later, I'm still sitting there and looking at it. And so there's a very strong connection to the past, and when I see that type of art. I didn't know, and I don't know yet if that translates when you're looking at something on a screen, or if you're looking at something digitally. Because digital art, the artist made it with their stylus. They had hand to their device, and it's not just one, it's translated, you know, infinitely. So there's some advantages. We can all look at it at the same time. We can be anywhere when we see it. I'm not sure how slow art with kids would work. I mean, I think it would work. It's just a question that I have. I haven't tried it. And so what would that digital experience be like? And then I thought, well, what would the virtual experience be like? Would it virtually, if you're standing in front of the Mona Lisa, is it the same? I don't know. I mean, it can't smell the same and it can't sound the same. So I don't know what that might be like. But I do know that regardless, art is a social experience. And that's where we can all come together. It can be a social experience even in absence of a common language, because I think we can at least gesture and agree or disagree. We get something out of it. And that's where I think we can always connect socially and emotionally with art. And just as an aside, as I was thinking about the digital art, if any of you are artists or not, there's Dada.art, so like Dada art, but it's Dada.art. And they're digital artists who are on this platform, and they create their art and they post it, and then others will view it and they tag onto it, and it becomes this long scroll. And so they impose their art form on it, but they're still connected. So you're looking at it and it's really interesting. And then they're posting comments, and it's very international. So it's just kind of a fun site to see. And then I thought, well, how could we do that with the kids? Could we start the work of art and it goes to another classroom, or it goes to another country, or, how might we connect, and what could we learn from that experience where we're showing different things, but there's still that connection. And how you change it, you bring what you have culturally or personally to it, and it somehow changes, but still all connected. And I guess that's kind of the bottom line with everything, right? We're disconnected sometimes socially and physically, but we're really all on the same planet, and we're all connected in more ways than we think. And I think any experiences that we have that show us that or give us an opportunity to share that helps and is good. And I think that might be it. And that's my email again. If you want to try this and you have questions, or if you want help, please send me an email, because I'm more than happy to. And if you have questions now, I'm not going anywhere. But I'd like you to try it. Give it a try sometime.
I was wondering if your kids have that. It seems like a natural thing that kids would want to do after they do their slow art is they have inspiration to do an artwork.
Mm-hmm.
They saw. Do you do that as a second activity, or do you find your students wanting to do that?
They love to do art. You're right. I haven't done it I haven't done that close together where we've had the slow art and then the discussion, and then, okay, now you do your own. But I could imagine that, it would be a fun thing to try. And I could imagine, too, having that discussion about your social emotional health or feelings at the moment, and then, of course, that spawning artwork. And then maybe from that, we could have slow art with the children's artwork, So there's a lot of different ways to approach it. Yeah. But that would be fun to try.
Something that came up to me when you were talking about the different competencies, the CASEL competencies, is I think it depends on what art images you show, right? In terms of what it evokes. And since you were talking about the teeth and the museum and so forth, I think depending on the competencies that you want to pull out or that you're interested in, you can show different kinds of art.
Right.
That help spawn that kind of conversation in a certain direction.
Mm-hmm. So it could be, I mentioned like a theme when we were looking at the Hokulea, but you could have a theme of one of your social emotional competencies as well, and then select the art. Have the kids select the art. Yeah.
Like, to me, the Homer that we looked at, there was relationships involved there.
Mm-hmm.
So I think you could have students talk about the relationship once they find out what the name of the painting is.
Right, right.
They could start to infer other things.
And relationships, it draws you that it's the relationship, the human relationship, but then it's about Dad leaving to go fishing, so there's a relationship with the environment too, and with other animals on the planet, so you could have a lot of interesting discussions about that. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I was thinking after, like if you did the slow art with them and they understood that process, and then, because I work with ELM kids, and I've been trying to teach some of the comprehension strategies for reading, and they're the same strategies. So like you're inferring, you're making, activating your schema, you're making connections. So that would be, I feel like a safer way to introduce those, for the big words, than the book.
Yeah.
Than more words, it would be, as long as it's separate from the slow.
Right.
But the process would be the same, but the result would be a little.
Yeah, that's a great idea, and maybe more fun, True, that's a good idea. We could try that. Mm-hmm.
Years ago, the National Endowment of Humanities had this program called Picturing America, and a series of these giant posters. I just checked, they're still online. And we have it in a library, they're big, and the idea was that if you make the artwork a bigger poster size, then the kids can see details that you wouldn't see otherwise. But what we found out was they would go to the website, so I have the kids go onto the website to look at the art after they've seen the poster, and they start enlarging with their device. So they'll look at the different components in that picture, even though it's digital. So you mentioned about the feeling for it.
Yeah.
But they like to manipulate and see it up close. And then we would go to the East Coast Study Tour, we take the kids to the mainland, and then they go to Boston, and they'll see the actual picture or things that, the sculpture that they studied in the library. So
Oh,
we have
yeah.
different levels of learning. But I thought that was pretty cool that they have things like Picturing America that allows kids to be exposed to American history through American artists. And that's kind of like what you're doing, but I'm going to try and see how to add that slow element now and see how we can kind of tie that part where they kind of look at it more carefully and quietly.
Yeah, and so there's that internal, you're adding that internal self-reflective component to it.
Why? Where are they? What is it? What's the time period? And so they have a lot of questions that come out of it.
Yeah.
So I'm curious to see what happens when we give them a little more time to look at it.
Yeah, that's a great idea too. Because there's nothing like things for me that are big. I mean, the big movie, our lives have kind of shrunk, I think, to this little 3x5. And I was just reading something recently about the Obama's portraits and in the museum, and they had so many people were in line to see them, but they were in line to see them with their phones, taking pictures. And so they were looking at it, this small image, and then they snap it or their selfie, and then they leave. So they created two lines, the ones that were the real paintings, and then the ones that were just sort of the giant poster-like paintings where you could take your picture in front of it. Because some people were waiting for so long that they really wanted to see it. And so anyway, yeah, interesting how people look at art and look at the world with their phone. Anyway, well, thank you for coming. My goodness, the last day, the last hour, and yeah.